All right, so today we're going to be taking Atomic Habits like beyond the basic. We're assuming you've already kind of, read the book and you're familiar with the basic concepts, but we
Yeah.
want to dig into those kind of subtle details, those potential roadblocks, that can
Mhm.
trip you up along the way.
It's easy to kind of get caught up in the excitement of, a new system.
Right.
But the real magic happens when you start to kind of question the assumptions and, figure out what really works for you.
Yeah, like I get the whole British cycling team story, right? Like 1% improvements adding up to huge wins.
Yeah.
It's such a classic example.
Yeah.
But honestly, sometimes I feel like I'm like spinning my wheels, making these tiny tweaks, and I'm not really seeing those dramatic results.
Yeah, that's a common feeling.
Yeah.
And it actually brings up a really important point, which is that
Okay.
not all 1% improvements are created equal.
Ooh.
Some tweaks have a much bigger impact than others.
Right.
And it's not always obvious which ones those are.
So how do we figure out which ones are actually worth our time?
Well, that's where this careful observation and self-awareness comes in.
Okay.
It's about tuning in to those subtle cues and cravings
Okay.
that drive your specific habits.
So instead of just blindly adopting every tip in the book,
Yeah,
we need to be more mindful about which ones actually resonate with like our individual needs and goals.
exactly. And let's take the habit loop, for instance.
Okay.
We all know the 4 stages, right?
Yeah.
Cue, craving, response, reward.
Right.
But the real power is understanding the nuances of those stages.
Okay. What kind of nuances are we talking about?
Well, think about the cue stage, for example.
Okay.
A cue isn't just a single thing. It's a whole constellation of internal and external factors
Right.
that all converge to trigger a craving.
So it's not just seeing a plate of cookies that makes you want to eat them.
Right.
It's also your current mood, your energy levels, maybe even the time of day.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the more we understand those subtle influences, the better equipped we are to manage them.
Right.
For example, if you realize you're most susceptible to snacking when you're feeling stressed,
Okay.
you can start to develop other coping mechanisms for dealing with that stress.
That makes sense, like preempting the craving by addressing the underlying, like, emotional or situational triggers.
Right.
Wow.
And it's not about denying ourselves pleasure. It's about finding healthier ways to satisfy those needs.
So how do we get better at identifying those subtle cues and cravings that drive our habits? Because it feels like they often operate below our conscious awareness.
This is where mindfulness practices can be so helpful.
Okay.
Just by simply paying attention to your thoughts, your feelings, your bodily sensations throughout the day.
Right.
You can start to notice those subtle patterns.
So tuning into the signals that our bodies and minds are giving us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as you become more aware of those signals, you can start to experiment with different strategies for responding to them.
This brings up another point that I've been struggling with.
Okay.
So James Clear talks about the 4 laws of behavior change.
Make it obvious.
Yeah.
Make it attractive. Make it easy. Make it satisfying.
Right.
And I love the framework. I think it's so helpful.
Yeah.
But sometimes I feel like the make it attractive part is missing the mark.
Okay.
A lot of the classic advice I see out there around making habits attractive
Yeah.
focuses on external rewards or like temptation bundling.
Yeah.
But what if the habit itself just doesn't feel appealing no matter how hard you try to dress it up?
That's a valid point. And I think
Like,
a lot of us,
yeah.
we fall into that trap of like thinking that we can just,
Right.
add some sprinkles on top and suddenly it's going to be enjoyable.
Yeah, like I know I should exercise,
Yeah.
but the thought of sweating and pushing myself,
Right.
it just doesn't do it for me. No amount of fancy workout gear or kitschy playlists is going to change that.
That's where we need to go beyond those surface level tricks
Okay.
and tap into a deeper level of motivation.
Yeah.
It's about connecting that habit to your core values.
And your vision for the future self you want to become.
So it's not just about the immediate gratification.
Right.
It's about aligning the habit with something more meaningful.
Exactly. If you see yourself as someone who prioritizes health and vitality,
Right.
the act of exercise becomes less about shoulds
Right.
and more about embodying that identity.
That's powerful.
It is.
It's like shifting the focus from external rewards to internal alignment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when the habit feels congruent with who you are at your core,
Mm-hmm.
the motivation becomes much more sustainable.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But what about the make it easy part?
Um,
Sometimes even when I'm motivated, the logistics just feel overwhelming.
right.
Like I want to cook more healthy meals at home,
Yeah.
but I get home from work exhausted and the thought of prepping ingredients and cleaning up,
Oh, yeah.
it just feels like too much.
I think we can all relate to that feeling.
Yeah.
And this is where the principle of environment design becomes really crucial.
Okay, I'm all ears. How do we design our environments to support those good habits, especially when willpower's running low?
It's about being proactive and anticipating those moments of weakness.
Okay.
So if you know you're going to be tired after work, maybe prep your ingredients on the weekend.
Right.
Or even consider, meal delivery services.
Okay, so it's about removing as much friction as possible
Yeah.
in those moments when we're most vulnerable to making those bad choices.
Exactly. And it's not just about food. Think about other areas of your life
Okay.
where you can streamline your routines and optimize your surroundings to make it easier to follow through on those habits.
This is making me think about my own habits in a whole new light. It's not just about willpower, it's about setting ourselves up for success by designing our environments and routines to work for us, not against us.
And that's a powerful shift.
Right.
When we start to see our environment as a tool for habit change, the possibilities really become endless.
Yeah, that's awesome. I
Yeah.
love that.
Me too. It's funny how we talk about being creatures of habit as if it's a bad thing.
Right.
But when you actually become the architect of those habits,
Right.
it can be so empowering.
Totally. It's like taking back control of our autopilot, right?
Yeah.
Rewriting the code
Yes.
to align with our goals.
And one area where this approach, I think, really shines
Okay.
is in tackling those deeply ingrained habits,
Ooh, yeah.
the ones that just feel almost impossible to break.
Okay. Those are the ones that keep me up at night.
Yeah,
The doom scrolling, the sugar cravings, the procrastination black holes.
we've all been there.
Oh, yeah.
And while we've touched on environment design,
Okay.
there's another layer I think is really important to consider,
Okay.
and that's the role of context.
Okay. How is context different from environment? Aren't they kind of the same thing?
They're related, but context goes beyond the physical space.
Okay.
It includes things like the time of day, your emotional state, the people you're with, all those factors that can kind of influence your choices in a given moment.
So it's like the same cue can have a totally different effect depending on the context.
Think about it.
Okay.
A glass of wine after a stressful workday might feel like a relaxing ritual,
Right.
but that same glass of wine at 10 a.m.
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have the same appeal.
True. Very true. Okay. So how do we use this knowledge to our advantage when it comes to breaking bad habits?
It's about becoming aware of the contexts
Okay.
that make us most vulnerable to those unwanted behaviors.
Okay.
So, for example, if you know you're more likely to overeat when you're feeling anxious,
Okay.
you can start to develop alternative coping mechanisms for dealing with that anxiety.
So it's not just about avoiding the trigger itself. It's about addressing the underlying context
Exactly.
that makes us susceptible to that trigger.
And sometimes that means changing the context altogether.
Okay.
If going to a certain bar always leads to overdrinking,
Right.
maybe you need to find a new hangout spot.
That's where being honest with ourselves about our patterns comes in.
Yeah.
Right? It's easy to blame willpower, but sometimes it's the context
Right.
that's setting us up to fail.
Absolutely. And once we identify those high-risk contexts, we can start to implement strategies to mitigate them.
Okay.
One technique that I find really helpful
Okay.
is something called implementation intentions.
Ooh, that sounds fancy. Break it down for me. What are implementation intentions?
It's about bridging the gap between intention and action
Okay.
by creating a very specific if-then plan.
So instead of just saying, I'm going to eat healthier,
Right.
I would say, if I'm feeling stressed after work,
Right.
then I'll go for a walk instead of raiding the pantry.
Exactly. You're pre-committing to a specific action
Okay.
in a specific context,
Got it.
which makes it much more likely that you'll actually follow through.
It's so smart. It's like preempting those moments of weakness with a predetermined plan.
And it takes the decision-making out of the equation.
Yeah.
When
Right.
you're in the heat of the moment.
You don't have to rely on willpower. You just follow the plan you already set for yourself.
I love how this ties back to the idea of automating our good habits.
Yes.
We're essentially outsourcing the decision-making to our past selves,
Right.
who were hopefully thinking more clearly and rationally.
And that's a huge win for our present selves.
I like that.
Speaking of automation,
Okay.
there's another really powerful technique we haven't talked about yet,
Okay.
and that's habit tracking.
Oh, yeah, habit tracking. I've tried it before, but I'm not always consistent.
Yeah.
What's the best way to make habit tracking actually work?
The key is to find a system that works for you and
Okay.
that you can realistically maintain.
Okay.
Doesn't have to be fancy.
Right.
A simple notebook or spreadsheet can do the trick.
So it's not about the tools, it's about the consistency.
Exactly. And here's a pro tip.
Okay.
Don't just track your actions. Track
Huh.
the context surrounding those actions.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What kind of context are we talking about? Things like your mood, your energy levels, the time of day, even the people you're with.
Okay.
By noticing patterns in the data, you can start to identify the contexts that are most conducive to your desired habits
Okay.
and those that are most likely to sabotage your progress.
That's so smart. It's like turning our habit tracking into a mini research project on ourselves.
And the more we understand our own patterns,
Right.
the better equipped we are to design our environments and routines to support our goals.
This is making me realize that building good habits is so much more nuanced
Yeah,
than just setting a goal and hoping for the best.
absolutely.
It's about understanding the psychology behind our choices, the influence of context, the power of intentional design.
And it's about recognizing that we're not alone in this journey.
Right.
We all have habits we're trying to change.
Totally.
And there's a wealth of knowledge and support available to help us along the way.
Speaking of support, James Clear talks about the importance of finding our tribe,
Mhm.
surrounding ourselves with people who share our values and goals.
That's so crucial.
Yeah.
Our social environment has such a huge impact on our habits.
It's like the saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Exactly. If you're trying to eat healthier, but all your friends are constantly tempting you with junk food,
Right.
it's going to be an uphill battle.
It's going to be tough. So it's not just about finding people who share our goals.
Right.
It's also about setting boundaries with those who don't.
Right. And sometimes that means having difficult conversations.
Yeah.
Or even making some tough choices about who we spend our time with.
It's about prioritizing our own well-being.
Yes.
And surrounding ourselves with people who support our growth.
And remember, it's not about judging others or trying to change them.
Right.
It's about creating an environment where we can thrive
Right.
and where our desired habits are reinforced, not undermined.
This is all so insightful. I'm starting to see how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together.
Yeah.
The environment, the context, the social support,
Yeah.
it's all interconnected.
And when we start to see those connections,
Right.
we realize that we have so much more agency than we might think.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on what it means to be a creature of habit.
It's about becoming the conscious creators of those habits,
Yes.
shaping them to align with the life we want to live.
We're back and, ready to wrap up our deep dive into atomic habits.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground,
Oh, yeah.
from like nuances of the habit loop to the power of environment design and social support.
Mhm.
But amidst all these strategies and techniques, it's easy to lose sight of one of the most fundamental principles,
Right.
the power of identity.
Yes.
James Clear's idea that our habits are ultimately votes for the type of person we want to become.
Yeah.
It's such a powerful concept, but how do we actually put it into practice?
Well-
It feels kind of abstract.
It starts with a shift in perspective.
Okay.
Instead of focusing just on outcomes,
Okay.
losing weight, getting promoted, writing a book,
Right.
we shift our attention to the identity we want to embody.
So instead of saying, I want to write a book, I would say, I am a writer.
Exactly. Because when you see yourself as a writer,
Right.
the actions that support that identity,
Okay.
writing every day,
Right.
seeking feedback, connecting with other writers,
Right.
become more natural and effortless.
It's like the actions become a reflection of the identity
Yes,
rather than a means to an end.
precisely. And here's the beautiful thing.
Okay.
As you consistently act in alignment with your desired identity,
Mm-hmm.
those actions start to shape your beliefs about yourself.
So it's a feedback loop.
It is.
Our actions reinforce our identity,
Exactly.
and our identity then motivates further action.
And that's how lasting change happens.
Wow.
It's not about white-knuckling our way through willpower. It's about becoming the type of person who naturally embodies the habits we all cultivate.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about those times when our actions don't seem to be matching up with our desired identity?
Yeah.
Like, I see myself as a healthy person,
Right.
but I just spent the weekend binging on pizza and ice cream.
Those moments are inevitable.
Right.
We all slip up from time to time.
Totally.
The key is to avoid letting those slip-ups derail our entire identity.
So it's not about being perfect. It's about getting back on track and reaffirming our commitment to that desired identity.
Exactly. And here's a helpful reframe.
Okay.
Instead of viewing those slip-ups as failures,
Okay.
view them as opportunities for learning and growth.
Okay. How do we do that?
Ask yourself, what triggered this behavior?
Okay.
What could I have done differently?
Okay.
What can I learn from this experience to make better choices in the future?
So it's about approaching those moments with curiosity and compassion,
Yes.
rather than judgment and self-criticism.
Precisely because when we beat ourselves up for our mistakes, we actually make it more likely that we'll repeat them.
That's so counterintuitive.
It is.
But it makes sense if we're constantly reinforcing a negative self-image.
Right.
We're less likely to believe that we're even capable of change.
And that's why self-compassion is such a crucial ingredient in this whole process.
It is.
It's about giving ourselves permission to be human, to make mistakes, and to learn from them.
This has been such an incredible deep dive.
Yeah.
I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for building better habits and becoming the best version of myself.
That's great to hear.
Any final words of wisdom before we wrap up?
Remember that building good habits isn't just about self-improvement.
Okay.
It's about creating a ripple effect that positively impacts the world around us.
Wow.
As you cultivate these positive habits,
Yeah.
you're not just changing your own life.
Yeah.
You're inspiring those around you to do the same.
That's a beautiful thought to leave us with. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of atomic habits.
It's been my pleasure.
Keep those habits flowing, and remember, even small changes can lead to extraordinary results.